Welcome back to Cinema Flex Music Picks. I'm Davey, your host with the most, the beast with the least. The least I can do today is apologise for lack of uploads in the last few days. Post Texas, world events elsewhere, events at home, didn't feel right to talk about either one of these films or to make any kind of videos given I tend to make light of things. But especially the nature of these two films, one being a very light comedy and the other being an incredibly dark Holocaust film, or Rise of Nazism film. Neither seemed terribly appropriate in the wake of Texas. So, thought I'd give it a few days. Back on track though, so there probably will be 2 uploads today. Well, since you've been good boys and girls and waiting, I'll just tell you. The next 2 later on today will be the 2 Hitchcocks we haven't covered yet, in Man Who Knew Too Much and Vertigo. So you'll have that to look forward to. Or ignore, depending on your taste. But this is the current presentation. Let us not get too far ahead of ourselves. We shall do the fluffier one first of all, and why I've made the double bill. So the reason should be fairly obvious if you know the films, but if not, I'll tell you straight up. The stars of both films are, of course, Jimmy Stewart, but also with Margaret Sullivan. With them, he'd starred in quite a few films in the 30s. And the supporting actor in both of them is Frank Morgan, popularly known as the Wizard of Oz from The Wizard of Oz, or Professor Marvel from The Wizard of Oz, or the guy who answers the door, "Nobody sees the wizard." That's also Frank Morgan. He's also the guy who has the Horse of Many Colours. He plays loads of roles in that film. I think he was also Judy Garland, don't quote me on that. But they both came out in 1940. They both have the same 3 cast members at the top, and they are both set in Europe. That, my friends, is where the similarity ends. But let us start frivolously, shall we, with the quintessential romantic comedy. There's a school of thought that romantic comedies are female affair. And I think that's pandering for the modern era, where they do market them as such. But the great romantic comedies of all time have always had wonderfully well-written dialogue, wonderful performances, great chemistry. That's what keeps them eternal. And they were sold as much to the fellas as they were to the ladies. It's only a relatively recent phenomenon, post Pretty Woman probably, where they started really marketing them as women's pictures, if you will. Although I think that's coming around again. You know, we're starting to get more LGBT romantic comedies and representation in romantic comedies a lot more, which is good. So we can bring it full circle, hopefully. But this takes us back to 1940, and we're at the was it Budapest, I want to say? Yes, it is indeed Budapest, in Romania. And it's directed by the great Ernst Lubitsch. Ernst Lubitsch, one of the true masters of the silent era, who just perfected his work in Berlin and went to America and made some of the great comedies of the 1930s. Ended up running, was it Paramount? He ended up running one of the studios, hated it, died relatively young. One of the many people who found that being a creative type and then having to step into the business aspect of filmmaking, not so much fun. But Ernst Lubitsch is famous among cinephiles. He's perhaps a little bit forgotten by the mainstream now. But Lubitsch was, back in the day, as famous to filmgoers as a Spielberg would be, or to us, or to 50s and 60s audiences a Hitchcock would be. His name was a selling point in and of itself. The Lubitsch touch is something that's been written about ad nauseum, and it doesn't seem to have any one real quality. The Lubitsch touch is very much a Rorschach test. It's whatever you kind of want to see in his movies. But for me, it's a deftness of comedy mixed with the ability to take serious matters and treat them with comedy, and take comic matters and take them terribly seriously at times. And it goes back to, again, the silent work as early as like 1919 and stuff. But this sees Margaret Sullivan as the new member of staff in Mr. Matiszek's store. Jimmy Stewart's the young up-and-comer who's ostensibly the manager. He's the main clerk, but he's essentially the manager. And they have, well, let's just say it because it's the easiest way to kind of translate it. If you've seen You've Got Mail, this is You've Got Mail, the original. But it's 10 times better than that film. They have an unwitting correspondence through a Lonely Hearts column. They tell each other great poetry, their passions, their feelings, their emotions. Unbeknownst to each other, when they go to work the next day, they're actually talking to the person they're sharing all that with, and they don't care for each other one bit. There are wonderful set pieces throughout this. It's remarkable. It doesn't feel like it, but it's pretty set bound. There's only 3 scenes that are set outside of the small department store, and even those are very, very brief, and I mean 60 seconds long. It's a total charmer of a film. As always with comedy, it's very difficult to kind of review without just saying this was a funny bit, that was a funny bit. But it's all in the charm of the performances. You can believe why they would dislike each other. You can believe why they'd be perfect for each other. You can believe that they should never get together because what if those feelings come back? But you can also believe, wait a minute, if their letters to each other are the real them, they are perfect for each other. They're made for each other, to quote another Jimmy Stewart movie. The back here mentions that it's a Valentine to love, wrapped in the ribbon of Ernst Lubitsch's trademark touch, the Lubitsch touch again. Wit instead of buffoonery, that's how they define it. Sentiment instead of sentimentality. Affection instead of attitude. Well, that's a good definition. I quite like their Warner Brothers definition of it. Lubitsch was able to recognise where to draw the line and not become cloying with emotion. You never have great outbursts of sentimentality in the films, but you just care for the characters through the journey you go along with them. None more so than the way their relationships are filtered along with, and unfortunately is depicted nowhere on the box here, Frank Morgan. He plays Mr. Matiszek, and he's the owner of the store, who he's suspecting that Jimmy Stewart may be having an affair with his wife. That's not a major spoiler, it happens relatively shortly into the film. Jimmy Stewart is not having an affair with his wife, but it changes the relationship that he has with him. We, as an audience in 1940, would have had a relationship with Frank Morgan because of The Wizard of Oz being such a phenomenon. So it's kind of utilising his fame. So just like we've kind of been presenting a few times this month, where Jimmy Stewart's image is being used in service of the story as much as his acting ability, it's using his popularity and his image to kind of be a shorthand, I suppose would be the best way of saying it, for what you should think about the character. Ditto Frank Morgan. In casting Frank Morgan, you're getting someone who you automatically want to like because he's the Wizard of Oz, you know. Even though he didn't really do much, did he, when you think about it, you know. Here's a certificate, here's a clock. You don't need courage. He was in you all along. He didn't really do much. He got himself home. What did the wizard do? Anyway, this is a review of The Wizard of Oz. But he's wonderfully charming, and he's almost the MacGuffin of the plot because he's the one that keeps them together as a unit for good and bad. So is his relationship to Jimmy Stewart as it crumbles because Jimmy Stewart's been like a son to him and now he's pushing him away. His relationship with Margaret Sullivan as she becomes the new top salesperson in the team and whatnot. It's a wonderful ensemble. There's all sorts of great supporting characters. Pepe is the errand boy, and he's one of the most fun ones. He's absolutely terrific. I don't think, Pauline Kael's quote, close to perfection, one of the most beautifully acted and paced romantic comedies ever made, and I think that's key to it. It's the pace of the thing. It knows exactly when to say, let's just stay with the characters for a few minutes here, even if there aren't a million jokes, and it knows exactly when to have the characters just go bang, 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 into some real, almost screwball, but never quite dialogue. So there's a wonderful scene, possibly one of the classic romantic comedy scenes of all time, in which at this point Jimmy Stewart does know that he is corresponding with Margaret Sullivan's character, but she doesn't know yet. And he goes to the meeting that she's arranged with a dear friend, knowing this, but she does everything to insult him because she doesn't know that he is dear friend. She just knows that that's her boss from the shop. So she pushes him away, not knowing that she's actually pushing away dear friend. And she's got some wonderfully acidic put-downs for him, as does he for her. They really do have this love-hate relationship. But as the film comes to a conclusion, and it's not a spoiler, it's a romantic comedy, folks, you know how these things end. As the film comes to a conclusion, they really do let their feelings come to the fore, and you do get the impression they just always had this great passion for each other, but they're both so restrained, both wanted to keep up appearances, they never wanted to admit they'd been, say, stood up, never wanted to admit they even needed Lonely Hearts kind of columns and things like that. I never wanted to admit they had that kind of raw, what's the classic Cheers quote from Sam Malone, Ted Danson's character with Shelley Long right early on. A magnificent pagan beast. I'm not sure you can quite describe Jimmy as such, but that's the kind of chemistry that we're talking about here. Jimmy and Margaret Sullivan apparently did have a bit of a fling in real life. She was married to Jimmy's best friend previously, well before this, Henry Fonda. But Margaret was great friends with Jim. They all kind of remained friends throughout the divorce and everything. It was one of those kind of bizarre circumstances, and they'd already had fights over who was going to get her. You could actually make a rom-com out of the real life story of Margaret Sullivan, Jimmy Stewart and Henry Fonda. Margaret Sullivan unfortunately died young, relatively speaking, and I don't think her fame has maintained in the way that it should have. She's a wonderful screen presence. She's one of the actors who can keep up with all her male leads and surpass them most of the time. She never feels like just the girl who's cast for the looks. You know, we're not far away from the Clara Bow era here, where with the flappers and stuff. Not that Clara Bow was short of talent, but we're not too far removed from the era of just actresses being cast because they were something nice for the poster. But yeah, Margaret Sullivan should be up there with Carole Lombard, and these Jean Arthur, these great actresses who deserve every bit as much fame as their male co-stars, but for whatever reason doesn't seem to have maintained over the decades. I don't know if that's an inbuilt misogyny in the film industry. I don't know if it's just the way films have been promoted over the years is from the male gaze. G-A-Z-E, not G-A-Y-S. But it just feels like Margaret Sullivan has had the short thrift, to be honest. She's a firecracker, but you can absolutely see why you'd fall for her. It's a terrible shame that she's not got the recognition, because as you can see here, she was billed above Jimmy Stewart, and this is after Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So, we're talking about a major star at the time. So you've got two of the great stars of pre-war Hollywood, one of whom obviously would still remain a star for a long time, sorry, I'm looking at it backwards, and one of the great directors of comedy, and one of the great studios of all time. You know, I mean, it's just, everything's working in its favour. It's just, I mean, I think it was originally an MGM picture for, it doesn't say it in the back, but I think it's one of those ones where MGM made it and then the catalogue pre-1960 whatever was sold to Warner Brothers subsequently. Samson Raffleson does the screenplay, and it's absolutely wonderful. It's just a delight. If you have not seen The Shop Around the Corner, it's the quintessential romantic comedy, but the comedy comes first. That's the key to it. It never ever says we have to sell you on this, the cuddling up stuff first. It sells you on, no, you're going to have a good time with us here. But the Lubitsch touch comes into effect. There are themes in here, which, it's a romantic comedy, remember, suicide, betrayal, and not for these two, but betrayal, divorces, what would be the word for body shaming, almost, bullying, intimidation, mental illness. I'm not making this up, it's all in here. Mr. Matuszek, for reasons I won't go into in case you haven't seen it, because I don't think it's a spoiler, as I said, to say they end season together, but Mr. Matuszek ends up in the hospital convalescing after a mental breakdown, and Pepe, the Eden boy, is informed that, oh no, this is a full psychological, neurological, blah 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 blah, and Pepe says, gee, is that going to cost more than a nervous breakdown? So it's the Lubitsch touch. There's a man who's tried to kill himself and is suffering from a deep, dark depression for reasons, but he undercuts it with how much is this going to cost us, Doc? That's the Lubitsch touch in one. So yeah, bit of a ramble on that one, but I think it's worth it because you just have to experience it. It's one of those ones where you end up just talking about the set pieces, and the set pieces are low key. That's the thing about Lubitsch. They're not, it doesn't need to have them on the Eiffel Tower or whatever, or great squares of Budapest. He can. That was the box rattling there, in case you think I've just made a horrible noise. He doesn't feel the need to have these grand sweeping vistas or anything like that. He lets the screenplay and the performers and the performances do all that work for him, and that's the Lubitsch touch. So yeah, we're putting this down now, and I do want to give, is this a phrase that's derogatory? I don't know. I do want to give a trigger warning. If you don't want to hear about the rise of fascism, Nazism, World War II, the Holocaust, please turn off, go with my good wishes. We'll see you in the future video. But should you stay, this is The Mortal Storm. Same year, again same cast, so Sullivan, again Bill Top, Jimmy Stewart and Frank Morgan. We start literally the start of 1933. Frank Morgan is, well, they don't say the word Jew in this, they're very coy, because they want you to, it's not cowardice, it's not that, oh, we can't say that word. They want you to realise, no, it's just the unlike. So without saying it, because they wouldn't have at the time, it's not that, oh, they hate, the fascists hate the Jews. It's the fascists hate anybody who isn't in line with them. So we're talking, the communists, the socialists, the liberals, homosexuals, Romany folk travellers, intellectuals, scientists who didn't preach their doctrine, anything they didn't stand for and tacitly approve of what they stood for, was against them. So the term they used here is non-Aryan rather than Jew, because they want it to be more universal. And again, this is 1940, so America's not in the war yet. And this is one of the few films pre-World War II where a film comes out in America with major film stars saying, this is happening, folks. What are we going to do about this? This isn't, just something on the other side of the world. World War I was one thing. That was political assassinations and pacts and treaties. Nobody really ever has got to the bottom of why World War I needed to happen, when it was basically a family dispute between Queen Victoria's bloody family. But World War II, of course, if there's such a thing, was a more noble war, and fascism must be defeated. Unfortunately, a message that we're still having to counter in 2020, or a message that we're still having to accept in 2020, because it's still not going away, is it? This sees Frank Morgan as a lovable, again, they're using very much his image from The Wizard of Oz. So you cast Frank Morgan, you get that straight away. A lovable professor, a Jew, again, non-Aryan in this context, but a Jew, who has been given a wonderful reception for his 60th birthday by the university that he teaches at, all his students, his stepchildren who adore him, and Jimmy Stewart is a kind of family friend who he's had a hand in, teaching. I don't think he actually taught him, but he's kind of just looked out for him throughout his academic career. They've just become kind of fast friends, and Jimmy Stewart's almost like a surrogate son to him, just as his own stepchildren. There's dialogue where he says, I've never really thought of you as my stepchildren. You've always been my children to me. I hope you've thought of me as a father, and they say they have. This is the early 1933. We're having, and it's difficult for me to even talk about it, and if you watch my videos, my kind of dark sense of humour, and I think you can be able to make light of anything to try and break tension, but it's so difficult to talk about this. I think Frank Morgan's birthday, his 60th birthday, Frank Morgan, the character's birthday, is broken by a report on the radio that Adolf Hitler has just won the race to become the new Chancellor of Germany, and they don't take the easy way out and have it be a fictitious character in a fictitious country. It's not Fredonia, it's Germany, and it's Adolf Hitler on the radio. That is Frank Morgan, is dismayed clearly by this, because he knows what the Nazis stand for. But his housekeeper and his two eldest sons are celebrating that Hitler has come to power. It's their time at last. Not everybody at the table is quite so excited, because he, Frank Morgan, and his daughter, Margaret Sullivan, are non-Aryan Jews. And Jimmy Stewart's, it's never quite said, but you're also led to believe that he may well be either a Jew himself, or at least someone who just will stand up to fascism because it's the right thing to do. There's no easy way to deal with this, so I'm just going to go in and say it breaks the family apart. The stepchildren disown their own stepfather, for refusing to teach at the university that Aryan blood is better than non-Aryan blood. He says, there's no science that proves this. all blood is blood. You can transplant from one race to another with no issues whatsoever, as long as the blood type matches. And he is disowned for this. Sorry, it's very emotional. I'm kind of struggling. Margaret Sullivan is the daughter who is trying to reach out to her brothers, or I guess half brothers, but they are now full Nazi. They go full Nazi. There's no pussyfooting around saying it. And I'm not going to go into too much of this because I don't think you want to hear too much talk of that kind of stuff. But and again, I'm going to give you this as a trigger because 1940, remember, so long before not only America was actually in the war, but long before the full horrors of the Holocaust were revealed, we see Frank Morgan in a concentration camp. And it's called that, 1940. There's ostensibly a storyline of, to give it a little bit of Hollywood sheen so they could sell it. There's a storyline of Jimmy falling for Margaret Sullivan and trying to do the right thing and get her and the family safely to Austria, which of course would have its own trouble because little would they be to know that Anschluss was coming and Austria would become part of the German Empire once more. But that was the subsequent year, so bad timing to head to Innsbruck, folks. But in my head, they once that happened, they escaped to, I don't know, let's just say they came to the UK. But there's no way that I can just review this after reviewing, hey, show up around the corner, and say, oh, this scene's wonderfully powerful. It's not designed to be that type of film. There are no aspects of it that are, look at the filmmaking, wasn't that a wonderfully witty line? Is it propaganda? You bet it's propaganda. It is directed by the great Frank Borzage, who again came from the silent era, directed classics with like Seventh Heaven, with Janet Gaynor. Directed quite a few with Janet Gaynor. She was one of the great stars of silent Hollywood who did transition into sound well. He directed I'll get there eventually. Farewell to Arms with Gary Cooper. He directed History's Made at Night, wonderfully underseen film. A wonderful director, Frank Borzage. But he, unlike Ernst Lubitsch, who was Eastern European, Frank Borzage had Eastern European parents, but was an American. So he perhaps was able to see better. Look, I'm an American, but I know my parents right now would be in one of these camps. So it's a coming, folks. Yeah, America, of course, would take another year and many debates over interventionism before they would, and of course, ultimately to the bombing of Pearl Harbor to really set foot in the theatre of war. But it's just such a bleak film, which their home, their family, their love destroyed by the Nazi regime against 1940, and we're talking about 1933 events. So this is before any of the true horrors had come to light. At this point, we're barely past Neville Chamberlain with his, I have in my hand a letter from Mr. Hitler, which history has been very unkind to Neville Chamberlain. He had seen a generation of young men wiped out, and wanted to do everything in his power to avoid it happening again if he could. He just underestimated the true evil of the Nazis and fascists. So, yeah, Oh, I hope you can see why I kind of didn't want to do this video the other day, given events. I didn't want to be. It was already difficult to talk about today. I can't imagine what it would have been like, and not that there's any direct correlation, but just it all adds up, doesn't it? The drip of world pain, Weltschmerz, the German word, world pain. I think it's a tough time, isn't it? It's a tough time, and it's not always easy to see a bright future, but especially when the fuzz are coming for you again. It's alright, I've barricaded myself in, they'll never get through those doors. But I do try and undercut things a little bit. I mean, if you are looking for any kind of novelty from this, there's a very young Robert Stack in here from a million different things with Dragnet and whatnot. Robert Young's in here, a young Robert Young, as opposed to Robert Old. Sorry about that. And again, this is a film that was, of course, banned by the Germans. I don't think they wanted this to be seen, and peeved them so much that they banned all MGM films. So, yes, I believe I was right in that too is an MGM film, and the library was purchased later on. So, what may seem small and personal was instead a towering, bold revelation of the brutality of the Nazi regime. A sweeping tale of the political and human chaos that rips a family apart, sets child against parent, lover against lover, and leads to savagery, sacrifice, and heroism. Kind of sums it all up, folks. There's nothing more I can add to that. I don't really want to go in, as I say, things like performances, theme, blah blah blah. It's all up front. It's a blunt film, intentionally so. It's not there to have undercurrents and themes that you might pick up on. It's very much a call to arms. So he may have directed farewell to arms, but this is the call to arms, because some evils really have to be fought. They can't be tolerated, and fascism certainly. But we got past that one. I'm sure we'll get past the next lot. Dictators never last. They get too greedy. People see through them and rise up against them. Empires burn, dictators die. It's the way of things. Folks, I can only apologise. This has been a much more incoherent video than usual. And it's just the nature of the beast. First of all, to contrast a romantic comedy and Nazi film is difficult enough, despite the fact that it shares three of the same actors, was released the same year, directed by two great silent directors, both with Eastern European origins, both Warner Brothers, or MGM originally, but difficult enough. And then you add on the week's events, and it just feels like sometimes you can't win, doesn't it? But if Mortal Storm teaches us anything, it's that maybe you can't win today, but just make sure there's a tomorrow worth fighting for. Oh, I'm going to draw the line there, folks, because for somebody that says I've not really said much in this video, I've somehow managed to talk for 34 minutes. I'm really trying to put off having to talk about tonight's video, because what the hell do you say about Vertigo that hasn't been said a billion times already? Vertigo for... Oh. Anyway, thanks very much, my friends. I hope you've had a relatively peaceful weekend after, no doubt, also been troubled by events of the week. But as always, stay very safe out there, and sincerely, love and mercy to you, to your family, to your friends, today and every day. Love and mercy again. See you tonight.